So we asked Ken Jenkins to join us. Ken Jenkins is the aviation crisis consultant. He has personally assisted air crash survivors and victims' families. Ken, welcome to the program.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, what is going on, if I may ask, right out of the box, before we get to specific questions, Ken Jenkins? Why are these planes falling out of the sky, like in the typhoon? You think they would be stronger than that? And what happened with this plane in the Alps?
Well, those are a lot of good questions. With regards to the Alps, obviously we don't know yet what happened to the aircraft. The good news is the cockpit voice recorder was located. Unfortunately, the bad news is that it was damaged, and we're still waiting to hear from the investigators as to whether or not they're able to glean and access information from the CVR, and still waiting to find the flight deck recorder. But it does seem very unusual that in the last few months there have been a number of high-profile accidents. However, with that said, there have been times over the years where there have been a rash of accidents. If you look within the United States, there was a period where one airline had 5 fatal accidents in 5 years. Another airline had 8 accidents in 10 years, and they haven't had any since. So, I just think to some degree it's a coincidence, and to another degree you have to stop and look and say, well, what's the type of aircraft, and, is there something specific going on with that particular aircraft type?
But this was a pretty safe aircraft. This Airbus, what was this, a big Airbus, wasn't it?
It's an Airbus A320. The equivalent to a large extent is the Boeing 737. Both aircraft are considered workhorses in the industry. There are thousands of those planes flying worldwide. They are considered extremely safe. However, when you look at an aircraft disaster, and I know you know this as well from media reports and whatnot, anytime there's an aircraft disaster, there's this fascination with what happened. We're all fascinated by flight. And when something goes horribly wrong, like with the Germanwings accident, there's such a high media focus to it that it kind of takes over. And that's what we're seeing, I think, right now.
So, and also this A20, this Airbus 320, is it's all computers almost all the time. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ken. It's if there is something that goes wrong, the computers take over. Is that right?
Well, yes. To a large extent, that is true. It is a very highly technologically advanced type of aircraft. There's a lot of discussion in the industry today, whether it's Boeing or Airbus, around the computer technology in planes, and that pilots really today are more managers of the systems and processes on the planes than they are flying. And so you hear a lot about the glass cockpit today, and that's certainly going to be an aspect of this aircraft investigation that will be examined.
Yeah, the glass cockpit being, of course, all computer all the time.
Exactly.
Can the pilots override that on the Airbus at all?
Well, I'm not a pilot, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. I mean, the pilots certainly have the capability to have inputs into what the plane does, and I believe they do have that capability, but I don't think that it would be right for me to answer that question. I don't know, to be honest.
Well, we appreciate your honesty. Ken Jenkins,
thank you.
Aviation crisis consultant. Ken, what do you say? What do you say to the family when they lose somebody in a plane crash? What could you possibly say?
Well, and I've worked with families in the past, as you mentioned in the introduction, and the best thing that you can do is, first of all, offer your compassion and empathy and your sincerest condolences, and then provide them with the number one thing they want, and that is information. And there's so much speculation in the media, and that's normal. I think most people get that. But when families come to an airline representative, for example, and say, I heard this on the news, then it's incumbent upon the airline to take that theory that they're hearing from the families to the investigators, and then let the investigators debunk that theory or add credence to the theory based on what they're finding from the investigation. So I think we're seeing that through Germanwings and Lufthansa. They've created family assistance centers in Barcelona and Dusseldorf and near the base point of the mountain, and they're trying to provide that information in a private area, provide food and beverage and access to computers and phones for people, and give them that, and access to grief counselors if they choose to be a grief counselor. So providing that kind of privacy is important, and providing that information is critical.
Ken Jenkins on the line, Aviation Crisis Consultant with Joe Piscopo, 746 on AM 970, The Answer right now. You know what I think about Ken, though? And I don't want to be gruesome, but we're very honest on the show here, and our audience understands that. We speak very organically. I think, the plane's going down. It's falling apart. I mean, and a family member has had to ask you this, Ken, through the years. What is it like? What were they feeling? Was there absolute panic, prayers? I mean, or do you go to the airline to ask specifically, technically, what happened?
Well, and that's a very valid question, Joe, and family members do ask. I attended recently a 20-year anniversary of an accident where the actual NTSB investigators for that accident held a briefing with the family members that came to the 20-year anniversary. And people asked, 20 years later, did my loved one suffer? And the investigators were very sensitive to the question and explained what was most likely going on in the aircraft at that time. And at the end of it, whether it's an airline employee or the NTSB investigators or any investigators, answering it, the question is we don't know. We don't know to a large extent what they were feeling or what they were experiencing emotionally at that time. And to be honest like that is as you said, to respond organically is key, is to say we don't know, and I certainly hope they didn't suffer.
Oh man, I can't imagine, Ken, you going to talk to families. That's a tough job. God bless you for doing that, man. Because they need somebody there. And here you are, you go in, and there's got to be hundreds of people with victims, and you go through. Does the government call you, Ken Jenkins? Is that what happens?
Well, I wish it was that way, but I'll share with you, Joe. The airlines today in the United States and those that fly into and out of the United States are now required by federal law to have response plans in place to work with and assist families in the aftermath of an accident. And whether they do it themselves through the airline or the airline procures a third-party vendor to do it, it is required by law to provide certain services. I was fortunate enough to work for an airline that provided those services long before there was a federal law, which was really good. When you look at Germanwings and Lufthansa, they all work very closely with the industry organizations like IATA and ICAO, which govern the airline industry, and they attend meetings on emergency response throughout the year, and they have a very good, robust program, and all airlines that I'm familiar with really want to do their best in helping their customers, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is taking care of the people you serve.
God bless you, Ken Jenkins. And the question that all my exes would ask, is there compensation for something like this? I mean, but I mean, we make light of it, but indeed, the airlines are responsible in that regard, correct?
Yes, sir. And there is compensation. It depends on the nature. Well, I say the nature of the accident. That's not exactly true. What I'm looking at is whether or not it's an international accident or domestic in the United States. There are parameters by which the compensation is provided, and certainly you always have the ability to litigate the accident itself for additional compensation.
I know you've answered all these questions by the families of the victims, and we appreciate you jumping on with us, Ken. Tough time, and God bless you again for what you're doing, and please join us again, Ken Jenkins.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the time this morning.
Thank you very much.